Awesome.
Cool, we're live, so we're gonna take just a second here to go do our do the retweets. So just give me a moment, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're good to go. All right, cool. So happy Friday, everyone. It's really exciting to be able to get on and deliver another live stream with Nylas this week. So I just, by way of intro quickly, I'm Ash. I'm Director of Developer Relations for Nylas.
And I'm Ram. I'm a developer advocate at Nylas.
Cool. Ram, this is your first time on the live stream, so really excited that you're able to join. And you're joining us today to, one, talk about NodeJS, which is exciting because JavaScript is near and dear to my heart personally. So a lot of our live streams have focused on other languages to date. So today we get to talk Node. But specifically, we're going to talk about Node in the context of webhooks and hosting and using serverless functions in an application. So why don't we just kind of get started by, Ram, maybe you can talk us through the scenario, what it is that we're trying to do, and then from there we'll start diving into the technical details.
Awesome. Let me just share my screen and then we can get started. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to just zoom in. And the scenario that we're looking at today is how can we actually get updates when a message is updated, or how can we get any information on our backend or within our application when an email is updated for a specific user. So in the scenario I'm going to walk through today is just favoriting an email or unfavoriting a message. So the way we can work around doing this is using webhooks. And the way I like to describe webhooks is if you were to compare like making a GET request, that's more of a pulling of information. So if you're in Google and you're making a GET request, you'd be pulling information from Google. But a webhook is more of a push. So it's similar to a push notification where you'd be receiving information of specific events. So we're going to jump into Nylas and we're going to create a webhook using the actual Nylas dashboard. So I'm just going to show you a quick overview. On the left, we have the actual navigation, and I'm looking at a specific application. It's called My New App Name. Not very creative, but we'll start working with that app. And we're going to go to the webhook section. And here I already have a webhook enabled, so I'm going to delete this one so we can start fresh. And we're going to look at creating a webhook. So as you can see, we can trigger events on any part of our communication layer that we're integrating with Nylas. So this could be either accounts being created, messages, contacts, and as well calendar and events. So we're going to create a webhook using the message update trigger. So one thing we need to do to enable this is we actually need an endpoint that can accept webhooks. And this is going to be an endpoint on our actual server.
Cool. So let's just take this for just a moment and encapsulate it. So essentially here you're going to put in, we got something called a callback URL, but essentially what this is saying, hey, Nylas, you call me, I'm not going to call you when an update happens. And Nylas is going to use that URL whenever that update that you are interested in happens. So in this case, whenever a message is updated, is what Ram has selected here. So what we're going to put in is that URL that says, okay, when one of my users with a connected account updates a message, call this URL. And so now Nylas knows where to give you a call when things are updated. That way you don't have to constantly just come in and check whether or not there's an update.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a callback URL just to get this started. And we're going to take a look at some code as well in terms of what goes here. So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio Code. And we're just going to focus on lines 9 to 14 for now. So the callback URL is going to be hosted on as a serverless function. And we'll come back to that towards the end. So anytime we set up a callback URL, what Nylas is going to do is it's going to check that that URL actually is working. And how it checks that it's working is by sending a GET request and passing along in the GET request a challenge query. So it's going to send to us a parameter that we'll have to pass back to Nylas to say, hey, Nylas, this endpoint's working. Here's the challenge parameter that you passed to us. So let's take this callback URL and let's add it to the Nylas dashboard. So I'm going to put in the callback URL, and I'm going to create the actual webhook. So here you see that the webhook's been created. So now anytime a connected user updates any of their messages, it will be shown on our actual backend. So we can take a look at what that looks like. And I'm just going to quickly show you the logs from Vercel. So this is hosted on Vercel. You can see here that Nylas made a GET request to our endpoint, API webhook /Nylas, with the challenge parameter. And what our serverless function did is it returned the challenge parameter to Nylas. We need to do this to enable the actual webhook.
So yeah, I think in sort of a phone paradigm, we were talking about this earlier, but in a world where we used to make phone calls a lot, you might like pick up the phone and call somebody and say hello, and the other person would say hello. That's basically what we're doing here. When Nylas picks up the phone and calls your function, your server, your endpoint, and it says, "Hey, are you there?" It passes you this challenge token, to which you say back, "Yes, I am here," by passing the challenge token back to Nylas.
This is another way of putting the challenge string. And what Nylas does is, in the response, or what our server should be doing, is returning the actual challenge string. And this sets up your webhook. And the next thing we want to look at is actually what happens when an event is triggered. So when an event is triggered, what Nylas is going to do is it's going to send us a post request at that same endpoint. So here on lines 18 to 24, we've added a few console logs in our serverless function. So anytime Nylas receives an event, so anytime a message is updated, we've added a few console logs that will tell us or tell our backend or application when a message or when an event has occurred. And one thing that's important here is anytime we're receiving a webhook event from Nylas, we need to be able to respond with a status 200. So this tells Nylas that, hey, I received your webhook event, and now I can continue using that information in my application, and you don't need to continue sending me the same webhook events. So there will be no retries after a status 200 is sent.
Super cool.
So now let's take a look at the Vercel logs to see what's going on. So I've actually starred a few emails, and as you can see, we've received a post event from Nylas at API/webhook/Nylas, and this says that message updated start and message updated end. So this is the information that Nylas sends to us anytime a message is updated for one of our connected users.
Really cool. So I think what we've seen here so far is, again, we talked through the handshake, right? The initial handshake, the hello, hello kind of thing in the phone analogy. And then once we're past that stage, now Nylas knows that your webhook is alive and well, and then it's going to send you that payload that you're interested in. So back in the dashboard at Nylas, we said, "Hey, Nylas, I'm interested in when a user updates a message. Please tell me about that." And so Nylas says, "Okay, user just updated a message," boom, and it sends that as using a post request to your server, and this is the information that Nylas sent over. So I think at this stage, one of the things, Ram, that would be interesting to do is just kind of let's dive a little bit deeper into the code.
Sure.
One of the fun things about this is, once you have the basic configuration set up, in our case, we registered a URL with our endpoint on the Nylas dashboard, and now we get to write some functions. And so I think the core of what you're doing here is nicely encapsulated in 2 blocks. From line 10, you've got the handshake. From line 18, you've got the handling of the payload coming from Nylas. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about what you're doing, starting at line 18 there.
Yeah, so in line 18, we're checking if the request is a post. So this is any update that we receive from Nylas. So through a webhook, we'll get a post request, and we're just console logging out the delta. And this is the change in the message. So if the message has been updated, we'll get a list of all the different changes. And so once we console log that out, one thing that we need to that I emphasize here is that we need to send back a status 200 just so Nylas knows that the message was received. And for any reason, if it doesn't get this confirmation, Nylas will continue to retry sending the webhook event for a period of time.
So in this case, it's really just like, hey, please hang up the phone when you're done talking. And the way that you do this, it's going to feel super familiar if you've used other server-side frameworks in Node, but you get to call, you just put a status on it and then call the .end method. Cool. And then, so let's just, if we look at line 20 quickly, it says, okay, you've got the request.body, and that's coming in through your serverless function, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. But basically that body is the payload coming from Nylas, on which there's a property called deltas, which, as the name suggests, is an array, and you can map through that. So what you're doing in that case is taking each delta and console logging it to, in this case, Vercel.
Yep.
So why don't we have a quick look at what that looks like?
Yeah, sure.
The Vercel side.
So this is an example of what a delta would look like once a message has been updated. In our case, we've starred or favorited a message. And this is the information that's sent back. One thing to keep in mind here is you won't receive all the message information here. You will just receive information about the message, such as the ID and what's been changed. And then you can decide what you need to do next. So if for your application, you may need to act on certain messages in different ways. So here we do have the message type or the trigger that was fired, and that's message.updated. And then you have additional metadata related to the actual message being sent back.
Yeah, that's a common thing that I think developers will, if you're not familiar with webhooks, people will almost expect that like you're going to give them the universe and the initial webhook, but that's actually frequently pretty inefficient on both sides. So instead, it's basically giving you the sort of top level indication of here's where things changed. You get some IDs, and then from that, your application can decide what to do with it. Sometimes you don't want to do anything, but in some cases, you're like, I need more information about this particular aspect of it. And you have the right entry points in the form of IDs to then go query the Nylas API to find more details about the update.
Awesome. Yeah, that was pretty much it for the code walkthrough. Definitely take a look at our blog. So I'll add a link to our blog if you want to take a look at any of our blog posts. So we'll have some upcoming blog posts on webhooks, and we have some on our blog as already. And as well, we'll add some samples to our samples repository at Nylas-samples for you to take a look at how to actually set up webhooks and use webhooks with Nylas.
Yeah, if you check out the sample code organization here, what you're going to find is there's just tons of stuff. Whether you're, today we're talking about JavaScript, but frequently, we're talking about different languages. Nylas offers SDKs for Node, Ruby, Python, and Java. So those are languages we frequently talk about in these live streams. But in addition to that, there literally any language that can make an API call, you could use. As a matter of fact, I know that our last stream, Blag and I talked a little bit about some different languages like PHP and Rust, which we don't offer SDKs for, but you can still use the Nylas API with. So cool. Ram, nice and succinct first live stream. This is really cool. I'm personally excited to be able to talk some JavaScript with you in the future on some more live streams. So thanks so much for putting this together and for sharing a few links.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
Anything else you want to say before we close out today?
No, I think I'm good.
Cool. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we'll see you next week with some more Nylas live streams.
Thank you. See you.